church is messy. But just because it's messy, it doesn't mean that it's not good and from God and something sacred. It's the same with family. Family is messy. But just because family is messy doesn't mean that it's not good. In fact, the fact that family can be so messy is part of why it's so good, because it's real and it's raw and it's part of God's plan in your life. Marriage is in the same way also tough and messy. But just because it's tough, it doesn't mean that it's not good and not part of God's good plan in your life. I believe that the main reason why people would leave church is because of an unrealistic expectation of what church will be. We think that just because the church is the body of Jesus and that church is part of God's plan, that church should be perfect in every way, that there's no mistakes in that organizations, or that leaders can't make mistakes, or the people should be perfect. But if you understand what church really is about, you'd see that church is good because of its messiness, and that church makes us more like Christ because you're surrounded by people that are just like you. In this talk, I want to just quickly share with you some thoughts I got from an article that's on the 5 stages of community, and just speaks about this idea that we've got unrealistic expectations of church, and that the right expectations of church should actually be that it will be messy, but because it's messy, it's actually going to be good for us and make us more like Christ. Now, the article was called The 5 Stages of Community, or Why the Unicorns Must Die. Now, the subtitle, the extra title for this article being Why the Unicorns Must Die, is just on this idea is that we've got this unicorn-like picture or expectation of what the church should be. And if that's the case, that we will always be disappointed, robbing ourselves of the wonder of being part of a Christ-like community where we've got space to forgive one another. Now, in this article, they quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German theologian that was killed by the Nazis, and he wrote a lot about Christian community. And one of the things he said about what a healthy Christian community is the following: every human wish dream that is injected into the Christian community is a hindrance to genuine community and must be banished if genuine community is to survive. He who loves his dream of community more than the Christian community itself becomes a destroyer of the latter, even though his personal intentions may be ever so honest and earnest and sacrificial. And basically what he's saying is, if you've got this utopian picture of what church will be, it will hurt the picture of church. It will hurt church if you bring that into the church. Instead, a more clear or real expectation that you can have of community is that it will be messy. And that God will use it in your life to make you more like Christ. And also in the same way that God will use your messiness, the fact that you are imperfect, not only you're good, but also you're bad, He will use in the lives of the others in that community to make them more Christ-like. Creating the environment where grace is required, where forgiveness is required. Now, in our Sunday on-site meetings today, we are actually discussing the necessity for forgiveness in a community. And we won't have time to go into the practicalities of how to forgive in a Christian community, how to forgive your brothers and sisters in Christ. But I only want to make this main point is that that church is an environment where forgiveness is required because it's an imperfect environment. But just because it's an imperfect environment in the sense that it's made up of imperfect leaders and imperfect brothers and sisters, it doesn't mean it's not part of God's perfect plan for your life and also for my life. So in this article, they speak about the 5 stages of community that all of us go through. So if you join a new community group or if you join a new church, you will go through these stages. The first stage is the honeymoon stage. Now, even in marriage, we have this, and in the beginning we think everything is just amazing. So the Lego theme song, Everything is Awesome, is playing in your head the whole time. This church is amazing, the preaching is amazing, the leader is awesome, the people in my community group are great, we spend time 4 days a week, and you just floating on clouds. And then you get to stage 2, where you get used to those people around you. And you're like, yeah, same old people, same old stories. And the excitement starts to diminish a little bit. And then you get to stage 3. If you hang around for long enough. And see, at stage 2, you don't get to know each other that well. And the first time you actually get to know the other people in the room, and even the same in marriage, when you really get to know your spouse, is the first moment of conflict. When you realize that they are not perfect. In this stage, you start realizing that there are quite a few people that have got some irritating habits on them. Some people eat with their mouths open, or they talk while they are eating, or they've got very strong opinions on certain things that you don't think is that important, or they always speak about the same topic over and over again. And it might not only be that someone irritates you, but this is usually the time when you get to stand close enough in community that it's possible for them to offend you. You see, if you never spend time with anyone, there's not much room for them to offend you. The more you get to know someone, there's greater chance they will offend you. That's why there's greater conflict in a marriage, because you are living in such close quarters. That's why family is so messy, because you are spending so much time in such close quarters. The conditions are there for people to offend you, because you get confronted not only with their, goodness and their weaknesses, but you also get confronted with your own weaknesses and your own brokenness. And that is why church community is only when you get to this stage where you stick around long enough and you engage enough to be at the place where you can get confronted with other people's not only goodness, but their ugliness also. And when you stand close enough to community where you get confronted with your own brokenness also. Now, sadly, in this third stage of conflict, or the rough patch, that's the stage when most people leave the church because of their unrealistic, idealistic picture of what they had about the church. And so they get disappointed and then they just leave. The leader is not who they thought the leader is, or doesn't do everything the way that they thought he's supposed to do it. Or the people around you aren't as perfect as you thought they were. You realize they've got mistakes. Now, the sad reality is you just realize they are just like you. I often joke saying, there's no such thing as the perfect church, so stop looking for the perfect church. And even if you do find the perfect church, please don't join it, because you will mess it up. Because none of us are perfect, and church is just people like you and me. But just because it's not perfect doesn't mean it's not part of God's perfect plan for your life. Those people who stick around through the rough patch in a community group, if you stick around long enough and you go through the rough patch and you stick through conflict, you get to the place of acceptance. You start accepting one another for your good and for your bad, for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And only once you start accepting and seeing people for who they really are, the good and the bad, and you allow other people to see you, the good and the bad, for who you really are, then only you can truly start loving them for who they really are, and not for who they're pretending to be. And people can start loving and embracing you for who you really are, not only who you're pretending to be. And so then you get to stage 5, which is re-engagement, where you can really engage with one another in a mature way. That's the expectation you can have of community. My encouragement for you is to stick it out. Those who stick it out are the ones who usually grow. Now, the right way to see this is that church provides the conditions for Christ-likeness to be formed. So, church, the other people around you and the leaders in your church are not like Christ yet. But because of their imperfections, they are creating the conditions where you can become more and more like Christ. And so as we're speaking about forgiveness in our groups as well as in our Sunday services this week, the encouragement to you is that if you've ever been offended by anyone in church, that's to be expected. And my encouragement for you is to find a way to forgive them and to accept them, and also to reconcile with them. Because in that process, you are becoming more like Jesus. And so it's the perfect conditions for you to grow and become more like Jesus. In the New Testament, we see lots of conflict that needed to be resolved. None of the churches in the New Testament was perfect. Even the churches that Jesus speaks to in the book of Revelation, in the beginning of the book of Revelation, as well as the letters that Paul writes to all the various churches, it's because of something that is not right. He's addressing a problem, and because there are problems, he needs to write those letters. And so conflict and imperfections are to be expected in church. My encouragement to you today is to take a step closer to Christian community, because it is good for you. And if you are listening to this resource, I hope that you see this resource only as a supplication, something that supplements and maybe just an add-on, but that you don't see this as church in itself, because this is not church. Church is supposed to be relational, and church is supposed to be messy, because in that we become more and more like Christ. Now, wherever you find yourself, I encourage you to take a step closer, whatever that means to you, to join a community group, or to just, be with church, with the fellowship of believers, with others more often, and allow that to happen in your life. Bless you. If you enjoyed this resource, please go ahead and like and subscribe and share it with your friends.